Okay, I'm Adam Rabinowitz in the Classics Department, a member of the Planet Texas 2050 Theme Organizing Committee, and one of the four principal investigators of the Stories of Ancient Resilience Grand Challenge. You've heard a little bit about how these flagship projects came out of earlier work, and ours was very deliberately pulled together across different colleges and communities at the University of Texas from previous Planet Texas projects. And here you can see the major ones that have contributed to our current work. So we are focusing across all of these projects on a single, very general goal. And that goal is to change the way that we think about resilience in the pre-modern past, and how that thought of resilience, the understanding of resilience in the pre-modern past, can help us imagine resilient practices and strategies for our future as we move forward. And what I mean by thinking about resilience in a different way relates to what Dave said earlier, in that our popular understanding of past climate stresses and the reaction of ancient societies to significant challenges is either triumphalist, that is, they found ways to solve all the problems and persisted, or catastrophic. They collapsed and they disappeared and went away altogether. And in recent years, the scholarly community has really begun to challenge that notion of either triumph or collapse as the only outcomes for a system, a human system under stress. And I'll point to the gradual diffusion of that idea in popular media in this recent article summarizing some recent research on the settlement of Cahokia in North America, which had long been understood as having been abandoned. It was a very large and very complex settlement involving probably more than 20,000 inhabitants, one of the biggest cities in the world, certainly bigger than most European cities in the 12th or 13th century AD. But it was gradually abandoned, and the explanation had long been that this population cut down too many trees, created conditions where the site was flooded too often, and then had to leave and then disappeared. Poof. But in fact, research at the site is starting to show that there wasn't a problem with the mismanagement of forests, that they had in fact done work to get the natural flooding in the area under control, and that something else should explain why the site was abandoned, including the fact that the people who were there did not simply disappear, but went on to be the ancestors of groups that still exist in different parts of that area. So there is a growing sense that looking at the past to find either object lessons in what we shouldn't do or simple stories about what we should do is the wrong way to look at things. This project is focused on using both scientific research and engagement with different communities who have a stake in our understanding of the past to change those stories, to focus on the lived experience of social responses to climate stresses, the lived experience of demographic change and human mobility, and to try to convey some of the results of that research in a resonant way to the public and to students through different kinds of interventions. So we were one of the earlier flagships to begin. We've been going on since September of 2020. And our initial work focused on collaborating with new and old stakeholders and participants to try to co-develop both a definition of the phenomenon that we were investigating. In this case, we've stuck with the term resilience, although we know that there are some difficulties there. And to then co-develop the research that might address those issues. So we had two workshops where we worked together to talk about what we meant by resilience and came up with a few core features, including a resilience as a response to loss, the role of power dynamics and hierarchy and inequity in the way we conceptualize resilience, sustainability, resurgence. We identified some core features, and then in the second workshop, we looked at those core features in terms of what kinds of research questions and research activities could address them, and what stakeholder groups we might try to reach out to involve in the design and execution of these projects in a meaningful way. We also had an external review shortly after that second workshop. Some of our reviewers are here. And that review was very helpful in providing some recommendations for directions that we should focus on, things that we should be careful with, and ways in which we could spend our energy. And I want to highlight one particular recommendation that came out of this, which is a recommendation that parallels recommendations we've received for Planet Texas as a whole. And that is, we need to articulate a clear vision of what we want Texas to look like in 2050 as the result of our research. And so we are currently planning for the second year of the project. We have a postdoc, Angie Locker, who has been working with us both to build capacity at UT for research in the archaeogenetics and isotope labs, and helping us to organize the logistics of the development of this fairly complex project. We've been able to isolate a set of specific themes. I'll go back for a moment, that we're going to concentrate on. We want to look at how concepts of resilience have been applied, especially to Indigenous communities and to marginalized groups, and how resilience has been prevented in some cases structurally or used in ways that are not to the benefit of those groups. We want to look at placemaking in that context as well. We're interested in looking at migration and mobility. We're interested in looking at how past societies, especially past urbanized societies, have managed water, especially in contexts where they were at risk of drought. And we'd like to look at consilience, that is bringing together evidence from different sources, from different disciplines, to try to understand better the very complex systems that characterize historical phenomena in the past. And with that, I want to pass things over to Angie Locker, our postdoctoral participant, who is going to talk a bit about resilience in the context that I just described, and understanding more about the application of that term and about placemaking.
Thanks, Adam. All right, so for resilience in place, we're interested in how different groups of people view and define resilience, how people create place, and then how place changes over time. So one way that we're addressing this is through collaborations with stakeholder groups and the study of place-based environmental education and traditional knowledge. So here with our collaborator, Fakile Numala, we are continuing work with the Indigenous Cultures Institute and the Texas Water Stories Project. So this portion of the project involves this really comprehensive assessment of the literature on the application of the concept of resilience, especially to Indigenous and marginalized groups, with the intent, sorry, that's my phone, with the intent of kind of challenging the usual use of the term resilience. So this is allowing us to gauge different ways groups not only view resilience, but how they alter and create space and perhaps maintain this collective sense of us, or what makes us us. And on the slide, you can see this image of a boat that Marie Lorenz, one of the Planet Texas 2050 artists in residence, built and used to travel the Colorado River from Colorado City to the Gulf of Mexico. And part of her project was to see how people use the river and how it intersects with their lives to, generate different ways that people view water and their landscapes and places around them. And we've also been building off of work from the PT 2050 Past Societies project and exploring the intersection between remote sensing, lab verification, field work, analytical scales, and modeling. So one key remote sensing application is LiDAR. Cheryl Lazada Beach, her research group, and our collaborators from the newly created the Maya Studies faculty cluster have been developing this comprehensive LiDAR data set for Maya regions in Belize and Guatemala to see how both ancient Maya and modern populations have altered their environments through time. So we're gaining this better understanding of how people are altering their landscapes and adapting to changes. And our hope is for this potential connection with LiDAR data from Texas throughout Mexico to create this corridor that spans Texas to Central America. So we might better model and analyze, hydrology and geoarchaeology, vegetation and mobility changes across these different environments and terrains, and then expand this type of work to Italy and Romania on ancient Roman and Greek settlements. And as Adam mentioned, I've been working on getting Dan Breeker and Melissa Kemp's lab set up for isotope and ancient DNA analyses of ancient human remains. So we might start to see individual and populational changes related to both mobility and diet, and how those might intersect with how places change through time. So I'll pass it over to Melissa to talk specifically about migration.
Thanks, Angie. So both humans, animals, and plant remains can be used to decipher how populations responded to past climate stress. And this not only includes migration and mobility, but we can also look at resource utilization and whether resources were accessed equitably within societies, particularly during periods of stress like climatic stress. So we're planning on using stable isotopes in ancient DNA to understand ancient migration and mobility. We're doing this work in collaboration with several partners, most notably Dr. Laura Wyrick from Penn State. And we'll be using genetic data gathered directly from bone as well as from dental calculus, which is calcified dental plaque that you find on teeth, to look at human genomes and oral microbiomes. These data allow us to look at ancestry, kinship, health, and diet in ancient human populations. And the genetic data complement the isotopic data that we also plan to gather about diet and migration and the geographic origins of people and animals that we can collect from the various study sites that we have. We've also been using abundance and morphological data of animals in both paleontological and archaeological contexts to understand the ecology of ancient species that may be interacting with ancient societies. And this is work that we first started developing in the Paleo Texas Plant Texas 2050 project. So in the upper right, we have a lower jaw of a bat species that we've been studying in depth from a locality in central Texas. And both with this bat species, several other mammals and reptiles, we've been looking at patterns of persistence during climate stress and also patterns of extinction, local extinction. And we become really interested in this question of what happens to populations that go extinct locally. Do they actually go extinct, or are they migrating elsewhere? Do they have some sort of evolutionary response that is just moving them from one place to another? Stable isotopes and genetic data from plants and animals are allowing us to expand upon the work that we started in Plant Texas, the Paleo Texas project. By now, we can start seeing how ancient populations are connecting to one another using genetic data, and also seeing if there's evidence of diversification or migration that's happening during periods of stress. So next year, we intend to build upon the isotopic data that's already been collected and collect new isotopic data as well as new genetic data. In particular, we're going to be doing a study of Roman period human populations from the Danube region. We'll also be analyzing ancient DNA and isotopes from animal and plants from Texas, Mesoamerica, and other populations in Europe to understand mobility in the context of climate change. And this work is accompanying ongoing efforts to incorporate these data with other published isotope data from Italy and Romania into the isobate platform that's currently being developed on TAC. And I think, Cheryl, you are next.
Thank you so much, Melissa, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm Cheryl Lazar-Beach from Geography and the Environment. I'm going to talk just briefly about water technology and management as one of our other themes in this project. We're looking at innovation and shared strategies and looking at persistence and resilience of water resources infrastructure. One example study is an oxygen isotope study of cores from old tree rings along the San Antonio acequias, led by Jay Banner and Michael Holloran, who are here on our call and on our team. And this will be using a method for water availability reconstruction from the tree rings that were piloted by another PT 2050 project. This will help understand patterns in the use and disuse of the acequia systems in the context of urban water management over the 19th and the early 20th centuries, the first of one of our examples of linking the past with the present. Another example, those were the images on the left and the right hand side of the slide. In the center, we have LiDAR imagery of circa 900 AD, late classic Maya wetland agricultural fields in Belize. And this project, among other projects using LiDAR in the Maya world, are looking at upscaling human land use impacts on greenhouse gas emissions and climate in general. Looking at what is the geographical extent, and then of course using field verification, what is the time frame of these activities to again track impacts on climate, but also human responses to environmental change. Then in the center bottom of the slide, we have a view of the interior of a 2nd century CE Aquatraiana aqueduct, which runs from Lake Bracciano southward to the city of Rome. Here we have the example of ancient infrastructure that still serves the city of Rome. The next steps will be doing lake coring for more paleo-environmental information and LiDAR mapping to help map the greater extent of these ancient structures that are still serving people today. So I'll turn this over to Adam. I believe he is next in discussing our project. Thank you, everyone. Oh, excuse me, Dan.
That's right. Okay, so one of the things that we're interested in, right, is the impact of past climate changes on society. And addressing those kind of questions is really difficult for a number of reasons. And I'm going to highlight here some of the difficulties associated with scale, both time scale and spatial scales. I want to start in the upper right. I have two like little schematic graphics there that plot rainfall amount versus time. And so one way we could think about this in a very, very simple sense is, okay, there's a big drought and society collapses, and probably doesn't mean everybody dies, but people go different places. And if that's like a 5-year drought, those are things we can date really well with various methods that we have in paleoclimate. And we might expect a synchronous relationship between paleoclimate changes, drying, and societal change. And that certainly happens sometimes, but perhaps a more likely scenario is if we just go a little bit further. Right now on the upper right corner of the slide, there's a plot that shows a general drying trend through time. So progressively drier, this might be happening over decades, it might be happening over hundreds of years. And I've just envisioned there on the plot that there might be different locations in a certain region that's undergoing drying that have different thresholds at which a societal change might occur. And that might be due to characteristics of the landscape. It might be due to climate variability within a region. It might be due to various water technologies that have been implemented in different parts of a given region. But we wouldn't necessarily expect all of the societal changes in a certain region to occur at the same time when there is sort of a slow and progressive drying over decades to centuries. And so this is something that is, maybe we don't think about as commonly when we think about the effects of drought on societal change, but it's probably more prevalent in the past. And this brings up the spatial scale and sort of the difficulties in looking at our paleoclimate records and comparing them with archaeological and paleobiological records. So that's shown by the other graphic here that kind of stretches from the left side of the slide and then down underneath on the bottom. And there's a horizontal axis there, but it doesn't mean anything. It just, I had to write all those words. It's the vertical axis that I want you to pay attention to. So this is the spatial scale of these different environmental factors. So the top is sort of a regional scale, and at the bottom is a smaller spatial scale on the local scale. So I have a number of words here, things like atmospheric circulation, rainfall seasonality, then down at the bottom, vegetation, stream and spring flow. And so I've oriented them in a way that they reflect sort of their spatial footprint. So atmospheric circulation happens, those changes happen on a regional scale, whereas changes in soil moisture, that's a very, very local scale. And then I've colored in dark blue the things that we can reconstruct most confidently with our paleoclimate proxies. And in gray, the things that we just basically can't say anything about with our paleoclimate proxies. So rainfall amount, we can't really say anything directly about rainfall amounts, but we can say things maybe about recharge, about soil moisture, and so what I want to illustrate here is that the fields of paleoclimatology and the fields of archaeology and even paleobiology have thought about this, I think, a little bit differently. And one of the things that we've realized is this discrepancy in the way people have thought about this. So what paleoclimatologists are typically trying to do is they might have some proxy for recharge or some proxy for vegetation. And really, a lot of times what people are trying to do is they're trying to get up to the upper left-hand side of this diagram to say something about atmospheric circulation. They want to look at, generalities and, get back to sort of atmospheric physics, atmospheric dynamics, what's causing climate changes to occur. Whereas what's really important for people and animals who live on the landscape are the ones that are boxed in red, things like vegetation and how much water is actually available for them to access. And so what this comes down to is that since those are really more variable on a local scale, we need to do a better job of basically creating maps of these kind of variables for different time periods in the past in order to capture not only the temporal variation, but also the spatial variation that might help us explain things like ancient migrations and other societal changes. Adam.
Thanks, Dan. And I'll note that one of the areas that we're concentrating on next year is exploring novel proxies for local paleoclimate situations like soil temperature and precipitation in areas that people haven't explored yet. And one of the things that has come out, I hope, here is that we are trying to work across these scales. We're trying to look at large scale, long-term phenomena, but we are also really interested in the lived experience of these moments where systems are changing. How do people react to that? How do they react to each other during that time? How do we understand those reactions? And how do we think about social interactions on the personal level in a way that's going to be productive for our ability to maintain our own society in the face of challenges moving forward? So one of the really important elements of this project is to try to create ways that connect people in the present, especially students and the general public, with these questions of change and climate and environment and the personal experience of some of those things. So we are actively pursuing a series of engagement and creative activities that connect to the work that we're doing. And I just highlight 3 that we're going to be working on next year. One of them is a continuation of the climate change adaptation through dramaturgy project, which culminated in, among other things, a high school group of high schoolers providing letters from 2050, some of them dystopian, some of them hopeful, but they had been working to imagine what things were going to be like and how those future versions of themselves or future residents of Texas would communicate back. And so we're hoping to continue that program of outreach to high schools and scientific education. We're going to build on the work of the Planet Texas 2050 escape room to try to create some installations that help to embody, from a multisensory perspective, the experience we think of dislocation, of being in a place that feels like home on the basis of sight and smell and sound, and then drop you into a place that feels very much not like home on the same sensory parameters. And we are establishing a collaboration with a local artist named Riel Sturkio, who I think is in attendance today, who's doing a series of works focused on the printing, the photographic printing of transfers of maps of individual patches of the skin of volunteers. And skin looks very cartographic and topographic when printed. And so we are imagining ways in which that might be juxtaposed with some of the LiDAR imagery that we're focusing on for some of the other projects. And I know that we're a bit over time, so I want to talk very briefly just about the stage that we're at. Suzanne offered some really interesting opportunities for people to participate in that flagship. We are very interested in finding new participants in our flagship, and in fact, in specific areas, this was a recommendation of our external reviewers. So we've listed some possibilities, some people we hope to contact. If you are a person who would like to get involved, or you represent an institution that would like to get involved, we'd very much like to talk to you. to expand this range and to start working more closely with stakeholder groups. And this is just a sense of the timeline that we're on at this point. We're currently entering year 2, so we are working to reinforce and build those stakeholder collaborations and to get started with some of the research. The last thing that I'll say here responds to that idea of what is the Texas we want to see in 2050? What is our vision? And I think that all of us and the community of participants who have been involved so far agree that the Texas we want to see is able to cope with the losses that we know will be coming. Not to be gloomy, these may be losses in just the way that we conduct our lives in order to prevent larger losses. Maybe we lose our lawns to prevent water crises in Austin, but we will have to deal with a change, and every change entails loss. We want our state and our community to be better able to deal with that. And we want to be able to think in different ways about how we welcome new people into existing communities and how we grieve the loss of people who leave our communities and move on. And this is one of the things that we'd like to focus on, the dynamics of movement, mobility, and integration within communities in the past. So we want a Texas that can deal with loss in an effective and healthy manner. We want a Texas that can incorporate mobility of people and plants and animals as well in effective and healthy manners by 2050. Thank you very much.